Yes, this is Tales from the Jails by John G. Sutton. Of course. Hey, I've been asked, by people to talk a little bit about one of the particular inmates, a notorious inmate, by the way, who was at Strange Ways. Strange Ways, when I was serving as a hospital officer there. So it would be round about the year 1982, I believe. And we're talking about a big guy, about 6'3", I think he was, and about 17 stone, big fella called Paul Sykes. Now, this may not know this, but the father of Paul Sykes was himself a prison officer. I believe he served at Wakefield. I'm not exactly certain, but I believe he was, because that was the area that Paul Sykes was from. And Paul Sykes was a notorious violent man. His general prison sentences were for grievous bodily harm, actual bodily harm, generally acting as an enforcer. And that's what he did. He used to worked for some so-called businessman, some wide boy in the area around Wakefield and Leeds, that area, where he would be collecting money for him, collecting money with menaces, basically. And if people didn't pay up, then it was his pattern to give them what he'd call a slap, which, in the terms of Paul Sykes, that was perfectly acceptable. I mean, if you watch, there's documentaries about Paul Sykes available on YouTube. I'd highly recommend you have a look at that, because you can see what a big handful he would be to handle. And at Strange Ways, he was indeed quite a difficult character. Most of the time, he would just comply, because he supposedly, so he said, he knew the rule book inside out. He read it and remembered it, and you couldn't pull the wool over his eyes. No, didn't pull the wool over his eyes when he kicked off. What we did was get a needle and a syringe full of something like Largactil, yeah, and hold him down and straight in the jacksie, upper outer quadrant of the right backside, glutimus maximus, straight in the jacksie. Yeah, that quietened him down a bit. The usual practice was people who received that, it took about 3 days to actually start to get round, and then they'd be on a regular regime, and they would take the liquid cosh, because it was just called liquid cosh. They'd take the liquid cosh voluntarily by 25 mils or 50 mils, whatever it was. They would take it as a medication 2, maybe 3 times a day, sometimes, yeah, 3 times a day. And basically that controlled them, because they had these violent urges. I mean, don't forget, you're a prison officer, you're going into work. You're going to work at 7 in the morning. You don't want to be rolling round on the floor, tattling somebody who's 6'3" and 17 stone, who can punch a bit, by the way. You catch for one of them, it's going to take you an hour to get right, But if you can get them right and hold them down and inject them and stop them, that's what basically happened with Paul Sykes. And he was dealt with in the hospital unit there. But always a very dangerous character. One guy that, of course, I've mentioned Frankie Fraser, never had to actually snatch Frankie Fraser and give him the liquid cosh. We didn't have to do that, because Frankie Fraser, he'd been there, in and out, he'd done it all. He'd been whipped, he'd been flogged, he'd been on in the block more times, yeah, than Bootsy, and he'd been on bread and water. He'd been in there, in and out, since the 1940s. Because no matter what you might think, oh, Frankie Fraser, good honest villain, a good honest villain, eh? Well, let me tell you this. Frankie Fraser during World War II was a burglar. So while the real men, were putting uniform on and going fighting the Nazis and making the world a place fit to live in, good old Frankie Fraser was breaking into their houses, molesting their women and stealing their property, what bit they had. That's good old Frankie Fraser, yeah. A horrible slime ball, and he would never fight you face to face, never did, no. Always hit you behind the back. Damaged one member of staff, I think it was at Wakefield as well, where he hit them with a metal chair at the back of his head, dislodged his optic nerve, and the guy was blind, the prison officer was blind. Didn't have a chance because he just got hit from behind. Never turn your back on a scumbag like Frankie Fraser. Scumbag. Yeah. I believe that there is a place for people like that, and he's in it. Right down at the bottom. Stoking the fires of hell. Yeah. Nasty, horrible creature. But once again, he played the system, and he used to creep up to the chiefs and the governors. Didn't take much time for the staff. If I crossed his path, which I did a few times, I used to just say, "Get in your cell." That was it, and then lock him up. I don't want to know him. And really, as long as he was behind the door locked up, he was safe. I was safe, because he wouldn't attack me when he's locked behind the door. Although, let me tell you this, I was working in the hospital unit in, it was the Postal Allocation Centre in strange ways, just during about 1981, 82. And one of the prisoners decided that they didn't want to be inside their cell, so started to batter their way out. Quite what they used, I don't know, bare hands, and broke the tables and smashed that against the door. And it took them all banging away, crashing away for about 5 or 6 hours. And slowly they were breaking their way through the door. But at the same time, they were tiring themselves out. So the idea we had was, let them get on with it. When they're completely tired out, we'll snatch the door open, liquid caution the jacksy out, snatch him down to the padded cells. Now, I'm not a great advocate of putting people into padded cells, but basically, if somebody has completely and utterly lost the plot, and they're damaging Home Office equipment, not that I give a care about that, but if they're damaging equipment, damaging the property, hurting themselves, hurting other people, potentially a serious threat, the only way to do it is to get them out of it and get them in a padded cell. I mean, where else are you going to put them? You stick them down the block. I mean, there's no medical care for them down there. They're just in an empty room and subjected to whatever kind of treatment goes on down the block, which I have discussed previously, which isn't a great deal of fun. Not that it's a lot of fun in the padded cells, but at least you've got medically trained staff. I mean, I was medically trained, and I would do my absolute best to make sure that they didn't actually receive injury. They may not like it, but they will be safe. And they'd be fed, and they'd make sure that they're properly hydrated so they get water. And if they needed to be medicated, then with the authority of the medical doctor, then that's what they would receive. But only with the instructions of the doctor, not at the discretion of the hospital's officers, no. Had to be ordered by a doctor. Seriously. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right. Various other notorious prisoners came across in the jail. There was, of course, a really nasty character. They called him the Black Panther. You may remember this character. His real name wasn't the Black Panther, of course. I think it was Nielsen. Not Nielsen, who was taking people, gay boys, for lovers and killing them, no. he captured this girl, killed somebody, captured this girl, I forget, Leslie Ann, I think it was, and strung her up by her neck in this in a sewer, I believe it was, and then started to blackmail her parents for the money, and they tried to pay him, but by the time they got to her, she was dead anyway. He was in Strange Ways when I was there, and he was on medication of a sort, and I used to take him his medication in the morning, first thing in the morning, about 7 o'clock in the morning, and he'd be doing sit-ups, press-ups, push-ups, step-ups, running on the spot, all this at 7 in the morning. Medication, took whatever it was, I forgot what it was, which I have good memory, but I can't remember that. Then I'd come back at dinner time, and he'd, sure enough, come to his cell, you know, and there'd be a couple of staff behind me, open the door. He'd be there, step-ups, press-ups, jumping up and down, all this, non-stop. 5 o'clock at night, or 4:30 at night when I used to take his medication. Same again. Didn't stop all the way through. He eventually died in prison. I assume he was very fit when he died, but he died. Good riddance to that shit house, doing a thing like that to a young girl. Anyway, that's just a few little insights into some of the notorious nutters that I have come across whilst I've been working in Strange Ways. And that is today's Tales from the Jails. Don't forget, folks, it's on Amazon. Psychic Screw. By me, John G. Sutton. See you soon.